We are responsible for building the models, programming them, monitoring them, running the experiments. So I think usually what our day looks like is in the morning we have a stand-up, but maybe a bit different than other teams. Our stand-up is not looking at a board of tickets. Our stand-up is looking into the results. And I think this is something we really learned over time. We really want to focus on, okay, how is our model doing at the moment? Because basically our whole team is working on that one model that's optimizing payments. In the morning we check, hey, are there any companies or countries where our model is not performing as it should? And how do we know whether it's not performing as it should? Is we have different baselines that we've implemented before, and the model should always be able to outperform these baselines. So that's what we check every day. Is our model still outperforming all of the baselines?
This episode of Inspiring Computing features Nikki, a tech lead in machine learning at a company called Adyen, where she discusses her journey into AI and her role at Adyen. Nikki initially studied econometrics but found it lacking in practical application. She then delved into programming, building apps and websites, and eventually combined her love for mathematics and programming. She worked at KLM as a software engineer, primarily on C++, before transitioning to ING, where she began working on extensively with Python and data-related projects. At Adyen, Nikki explains that the company facilitates payment processes for various businesses, ensuring integration with different payment methods for companies like streaming services and e-commerce platforms. She elaborates on the behind-the-scenes process of payments, including the risk checks, the authentication, emphasizing Adyen's role as a payment gateway and its banking license, which allows for same-day payment processing. Nikki discusses the complexity of payment optimization due to different messaging protocols and the rules across banks, particularly with Visa and MasterCard. Adyen maintains standards and the smooth transition of these protocols, leveraging machine learning models trained on past data to adapt to changes and ensures seamless payment processing across various banks and regions. They experiment different models per region, per group, and companies to optimize its performance. Welcome to Inspiring Computing. This podcast is where computing meets the real world. Inspiring Computing aims to trigger your curiosity by talking to proficient and advanced MATLAB, Python, and Julia users who use these tools to deepen their understanding of the world around them by simulating it, exploring trade-offs, and gaining insights that help their companies add more value. In addition to proficient users, we will be talking to product marketing, toolbox authors, package developers, and library maintainers to see what drives their development and what issues they're solving for others to benefit from. Welcome, Nikki, to Inspiring Computing. It's great to have you on the show. I came across you in PyData events in the Netherlands. We got talking, and it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. Thank you for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure to have a fellow organizer on the show as we organize these events. But before we get into exactly what you do with PyData and what you do at your company Adyen, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and how did you actually even get involved in AI in the first place?
My name is Nikki. I'm working as a tech lead machine learning in a company called Adyen. Yeah, so how did I get into AI? It's a little bit of a longer story. So I started actually studying econometrics and I really liked the mathematical side, but for me it did not really feel applied enough. So then I came across this minor programming, and that's in half a year I built an app, a website, and I really loved creating things. So that's how I learned, okay, I really would like to combine mathematics and programming. Then I joined KLM, where I was more of a software engineer. There I programmed still C++, which I really liked back then, but I'm so happy I program in Python nowadays. Back then, when people asked me, do you prefer Python or C++, I programmed a little bit in Python back then. I was really like, no, you should program in C++. It's so fast, and you have all these nice classes. It's strict on typing, and now if I look back, it's like, why was I ever programming in C++? Python is so much more user-friendly and easier to build things fast. Then I joined ING, where I started working on a daily basis in Python. Before it was more in courses and on university. And I really loved it from the beginning. Creating visualization was easy. Creating web apps is easier. Your just the speed of building things is so much faster. And here I worked on several models, got involved in a lot of different projects. And so that's how I rolled into AI machine learning.
Wow. So that, just to double click on a few things there. So you study econometrics, studied a bit of computer science,
Yes.
worked for KLM being the airline company in the Netherlands, correct?
Indeed.
Then you went to a bank, and then that's where you picked up Python. So and you called out that there's this moment where you stopped liking C++ or started preferring Python. What was the pivoting moment? Was this it, or was it
ING. So at KLM, we were mainly using C++ because all the legacy tools were built in C. So we were being innovative with using C++. Then I moved to ING, where they had Python as the basic language for data-related projects, which makes a lot of sense actually. And so then I discovered actually working on a daily basis with Python. I discovered how easy things are and how quickly to set things up. I still miss the strong typing though.
So do you use type hints now?
Yes, definitely.
Oh, you're a big fan? Okay, but we're going to dive into that a little bit more at your company, Adyen. So you're a tech lead at Adyen, and maybe some of us don't actually know this company because your company is awesome, but it's very much behind the scenes. So can you tell us a little bit what Adyen does as a company?
Yes, of course. So Adyen processes payment. So as our customers, we have big companies like some big streaming companies where you might have your subscription. We have e-commerce. So for all of these different companies, we make sure they can offer different payment methods. So if a company wants to offer Adyen, credit card payments, maybe Klarna, we make sure that we integrate with the merchants and we integrate with the payment methods. So we facilitate payments.
So it's surprising because you would expect like large companies, wherever you give your credit card or you do a direct payment, for a user, it feels like that money is going directly to the company that you're actually paying for something, be that a subscription online or purchasing something. But that's actually not often the case, right? So Adyen is the engine behind it. Can you maybe explain a little bit more detail what happens? So from the moment that I get this pop-up window on my phone or something, and then you say, would you like to pay for it? And you say, yes, I click next. Then actually what happens? Can you describe this process a little bit?
Then we at the end receive the payment. We do risk checks. We also have machine learning teams that help us doing all of these risk checks. And we have a connection with your bank. So we first check, hey, is this a risky payment? If it's okay, we continue. Then one thing, if you see a pop-up like, hey, sometimes you see a pop-up in your on your app from, hey, are you really the person you say you are? You need to authenticate. So we also have a model that decides, okay, this customer needs to authenticate. This customer we've already seen before. So in the EU, most of the time regulation says, okay, everyone needs to, but in other regions, this might be different. And then we have the model I'm working on. So this payment you can see as, like it's like a payment message actually. And this message goes from you when I receive the payment to we pass it through to your bank. But you can imagine there are a lot of different users with a lot of different banks, and all of these, and in theory, payment should be standardized. So MasterCard, for example, and Visa have rules what the payment message should look like. But all of the issuing banks in the entire world need to adapt to these changes. And sometimes you can imagine banks are a little bit slower to implement the new rules. Other banks are fast. And our model picks up on these things. How to format the message. So the model I'm working on decides how to format the message given which bank the user is from. And all of these models run in the time you make the payment. So really in less than 2 seconds, all of these models are called and make their predictions. And I think that's, for me at least, what's so cool to work at the company I work for.
Yeah, so before we dive into exactly what your team does, so I'm still curious on this process. So it feels like, so I've always thought when I buy something, I thought money would go directly from my bank account to the bank account of the person or company selling stuff. But what you're telling me is it doesn't quite happen like that. So first of all, the company that's selling me stuff, they don't have necessarily a banking status. And this is not a direct bank transfer because cross-country bank transfers take some time. There's a whole bunch of rules, legislations. And often the person or company selling, they don't want to care about this. So hence, There's a payment gateway, Adyen, and you guys are one of the biggest in the world. I think it's a Dutch company out of Amsterdam. It's grown phenomenally. I'm very happy about what you guys are doing. But you're not the only one in the world that does this, but you are one of the big stakeholders. So then let me see if I get this straight. I say I want to buy something. The company that is going to receive my money, they have an agreement with you so that the payment first message goes from my machine to you, and you can talk to both banks. So you first validate who I am as a person. If I'm a dodgy person, yes or no. I'm assuming that you try to fit in some rules and you follow legislations. And if I am a dodgy person or I'm known to do some kind of criminal activity, you flag it, or maybe one of my buddies or friends, and then you collecting hundreds and thousands of these things on a daily basis, right?
Exactly.
And then what happens is you then have to dispatch and give the green light saying, okay, this payment can go through. But the money itself, does it directly go from my bank account to the end user's bank account, or do you receive the money and then you relay it? How does that work?
Yeah, so Adyen has a banking license, so we make sure the money arrives on the same day, but behind the scenes, it might be that actually we pay out the same day, but yeah, there's a bit of time in between.
Because these are all the different countries. So so I live in the Netherlands, but I come from many countries. It feels like every country has got their own little payment agreement. So the local banks, they typically can talk to each other and have payments instantaneously. But that instantaneously, it's not that the money is actually transferred. My understanding is each bank will allocate a bit of assets and say, okay, this money is up for grabs. And then actually the money is transferred from that big bucket of money, but not directly from each individual's bank account. So there's a bit of a timing element. But you do that just on steroids on a global basis. Is that
exactly? Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is super cool. And I think there are many places where probably Python is used, but you focus on payment optimization. So tell me a little bit more about these and maybe why is it so difficult? Where does this all go wrong?
Yes, I think the complexity comes from all of the different banks involved. So I'm going to use Visa and MasterCard as an example. So when we process payments of credit card payments of Visa and MasterCard, and they have a standardized message which every issuing bank should follow. Now, every half a year or so, Visa and MasterCard come out with a new set of rules, and all of the issuing banks in the whole world need to follow these new rules. And you can imagine sometimes things are not adopted as quickly as they should. And we could say, okay, we just going to follow the rules, but then some issuing banks might start accepting payments from certain merchants. And this is, of course, not something we want. We want we want shoppers to be able to buy things. So we make sure that if an issuing bank is a bit slower to adopt, that we still use the old formatting.
Oh, so okay. So then you're like gateway keepers and you're keeping track of all the different versions of messaging protocols for every bank, and you're maintaining standards of when it gets implemented. And when you say you did some models, so I'm assuming it's not just rule-based saying, oh, okay, this bank uses this rule, oh, this format, they're a little bit slow, so we just switch it. So you actually make this smooth transition for everybody by hashing out the hints in this process and letting people adopt it at their own pace.
Yeah,
Is that it?
exactly. And it's a very good point. If we would have to do this manually, like the amount of transactions we have and amount of banks we connect with, this would be impossible. So we train on the past data and then the model automatically learns, okay, so many banks have now adopted these new rules. And we can also see in that retraining our model that models become still quite soon. So it's really the payment landscape is evolving pretty fast. So that also makes it difficult, but also exciting.
So then just to make sure I understand. So the idea is you don't chase every bank. So it's not that you go so I guess in the Netherlands, there's 20 or so banks. And then if you extrapolate that across Europe, there must be, I don't know, hundreds of different banks with different licenses, big or small. It's not that you are on the phone with the bank teams and say, have you implemented this thing? Is it in production? Yes or no? Because that's unscalable. So you flip it around and you're just on the receiving end, and then you can pick up, because of the volume, you can pick up when they've effectively rolled out things, because also probably banks roll it out maybe per regions, per countries, and it's not as standard as an on-off thing. They say, let's try it out first in this region. Okay, let's just try it out in New York. Does it work in Europe? Okay, now we're ready for the rest of the US kind of thing. So you do your machine learning on collecting that, and you actively maintain models, or one model? How does that work? Is it like one model per bank? Does that mean you've got 1,000 different models in the background and you're training each model, or how should I think of this?
So it depends a bit, and this is something we experiment with. At the moment, I think we are running around 10 models, and we can indeed create different models per region. We have the possibility to create different models per group of companies we see that are similar. And that's something we are constantly testing out. So we have this experimentation way of working where we test different versions of models. So if we see that that creating different models per country or different models per group of company works best, that's what we go for.
Oh, I see. Okay, so then you've got a group of models that you're maintaining, which probably changes over time.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that it's not a straightforward, it's just one model for the entire world. And then, so tell me a little bit more about this. So you're effectively training your models to standardize and make the payment happen, right? But do your models, are they just looking at these payment messages, or are they also thinking about how much money should Adyen as a company have set aside to pay out to their suppliers? Do you take into account these buffer levels, the timing? Tell me a little bit more what these models are, or is it just basically message format in, message format output that works?
Yeah, so the models I'm working on, the payment optimization models, are indeed working on adapting the payment message and optimizing the payment itself. And we have other teams that make sure that we have enough money that our exposure is not too high, that we have enough money to pay out to them. Yeah, that's all in place, but that's a different team.
Okay, and then I guess the fraud and the rules and legalities, these are all different teams.
Yes, indeed.
And I'm assuming Python is used across the board in many different places in Adyen, right? But your team specifically is on the message formatting.
Yeah. I think all of our ML teams are using Python as their language. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about specifically on your team. So you say Python. Are there any specific tools that you'd like to call out, or have you developed your own internal tools, or is this something that you can't speak about?
You mean for monitoring or?
No, for the messaging. So you create these models. Are there any specific Python packages that you use, or are there things that you've built internally that you'd like to talk about?
Okay. Yes, we tested working with different models. So we've tested LightGBM, XGBoost, PyTorch, and so this also really changes over time what we're using. We're not really bound to one model or library. We constantly test out, hey, is LightGBM still the way to go, or do we see more benefits of building a neural network?
I see. So then, but on your team, are you like the team of data scientists, which are just creating these models, and then do you hand it over into production, or are you more on taking care of the whole thing from idea to production? Tell me a little bit about how does this work? How does your team's day-to-day look like? Okay, now we got 10,000 messages from banks across the world. We put it through our model. Okay, does this work? Yes or no? What happens?
Yeah. So we are responsible for building the models, programming them, monitoring them, running the experiments. So I think usually what our day looks like is in the morning, we have a stand-up, but maybe a bit different than other teams. Our stand-up is not looking at a board of tickets. Our stand-up is looking into the results. And I think this is something we really learned over time. We really want to focus on, okay, how is our model doing at the moment? Because basically our whole team is working on that one model that's optimizing payments. In the morning we check, hey, are there any companies or countries where our model is not performing as it should? And how do we know whether it's not performing as it should? Is we have different baselines that we've implemented before, and we know the model should always be able to outperform these baselines. So that's what we check every day. Is our model still outperforming all of the baselines? And it does happen from time to time that we are underperforming for a company on one of the baselines. And what we do then is we start an investigation. So one of us looks into the data. Why is the model not picking up on the new behavior? Sometimes it's because it's something new in the data. The company started sending us a different kind of different kind of transactions that we saw from this company before. So the model does not know what to do yet. In this case, it's pretty easy. We retrain the model, and it also happened that a bug somewhere in the code. One thing that once happened is that we put a filter somewhere and that we excluded part of the training data. We didn't realize. So we were like, why is the model not picking up on this very obvious behavior? I could clearly easily do this, but we found that there was a filter somewhere in the data which was removing the relevant data for the model to learn. And once we added it, it was all fine again, but it gave us really headaches for a week or so.
Yeah. So then maybe just to talk a bit about these baselines. So these baselines, I guess this is historic information that you have, right? Because models, they're not 100% accurate, right? So I'm assuming that every now and again you get this wrong, and then that causes problems. So that's when you're looking at the results, right? So every morning you stand up, you look at the results, and you say, okay, how many of these things didn't work? So what does that mean when something doesn't work? It's okay, your model didn't predict things correctly, and then what, the payments get halted for a day? Should I think of it like that, or what happens?
Yeah, it's a good question. The thing we look into is how many payments get accepted. So we believe by doing our adjustments to the payment message, we can get more transactions approved. So what we do is there's a baseline where we basically do nothing to the payment message. So we just pass it as is, and that's one of our baselines. And then we compare, hey, if we do all of these optimizations, we expect that the number of payments that get approved increases. Check, hey, is there a significant uplift between what our model is doing and what how group is performing? And if we see that the model gets less transactions approved than just passing the message as is, then we know, okay, there's clearly something wrong. We need to dive into this.
Okay, so then just from my understanding is because Adyen is a company, you make money off the transactions, right? So you take a tiny percentage of it. So I'm assuming that a tiny improvement actually can equate to, it's not just a couple of euros or dollars here and there. This can come up to millions very quickly based on your volume. So this is that a true statement that this is small improvements make huge impact?
Yeah, definitely. Our model processes over millions of payments every day. So even an increase in performance of 0.20%, we're already like super excited.
Oh, yeah. But does that mean bonuses for the whole team? No, it doesn't quite work out like that.
No.
Right. Because the other constraint you also mentioned was speed, right? So because you're processing this high number of payments, so you said you have to do this in a couple of seconds. Do you have time constraints to make this a reality?
Yeah, definitely. We need to make a predictions within 200 milliseconds, but we aim for less than 100, around 80.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize these were happening at such a fast rate. And then maybe just on a more technical side of things. So you have these models, right? So they're in production. Is there just in one center place? Or does all payments have to get rerouted through the Dutch? I'm assuming they live in the Netherlands, these models. Or have you duplicated and pushed these out across the world to multiple points?
Yeah, there are multiple servers in the world. And depending on where you pay, your payment get processed in a different location. There's a data center in the US that will process your payments. Yeah. And it's spread over a lot of different machines.
Yeah. But you're not responsible for the deployment of the model to all of these locations, right? So your team just creates the models, and once you're done, then you hand it over and say, okay, dear Adyen IT infrastructure, make sure that these models are there because payments have to be done closer to the customers. Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly. We're luckily not responsible for maintaining all of these models on all of these data centers, but we are able to automatically bring our models to production.
And then that's when in the morning you say, so every day you have your stand-up. Yeah. So I'm assuming your 9 o'clock mornings are like, everyone's either super excited or super angry. Oh no, what's going to happen today? But does that then lend itself to a bit of finger pointing? Oh no, I was responsible for the US and then something went wrong on your team. How do you actually structure that from a team perspective? Do you specialize in messages per region? Is that how you divide your team, or is it more like pure mathematical skills? I'm curious now how your team looks like and how you split the work.
Yeah, we don't split per region or a group of companies. We split the work in different ideas we have. So I can take an example. In the past, we have a lot of training data, and we can actually not train our model on all of the data we're having. So we do some sampling. And before the sampling was just random. And then one of us thought, maybe we can actually do a little bit better than random sampling, because we know for some companies, they have the most recent traffic is most relevant for the model to pick up on new things. But other companies might have monthly patterns where they get transactions in end of the month. That's like an experiment idea. And then one of us starts working on this idea, implementing it, doing research, and then actually run the idea as an experiment. And that's a very exciting moment for us. So then we put it on a very small amount of real transaction traffic after we tested the entire circle. And then every day you get new results in how your new idea is performing. And then you really hope, okay, do I get an increase with this new experiment idea, or will it just perform so-so?
So let me see if I get that straight. So there's another variable lens that you have here is even if you have a new idea, even if it makes it into production, that concept of production is not for the entire customer base or an entire custom. You turn it on slowly. Is that
Exactly.
it? So you can say like one of your customers, customer X, they have, I don't know, let's say 1 million transactions per day. And then you say, okay, I've got this new idea. And then you say, instead of dealing with 1 million transactions, let's do 100. And then if that works, and then the next day, maybe you make it 1,000, and then you slowly but surely ramp it up to make sure that things work. And does your team automatically decide how to choose that? Is that maybe a parameter that your team can configure of how many or what percentage of the payment transactions you feed model A or model B?
Yeah, definitely. So our team is responsible for experimenting as well.
Okay. And how long does it actually take to train these models? So I'm assuming they have to be really fast. So maybe these models are not like humongous, but does it take a long time to train
it?
it?
Takes around, I would say, 8 hours or so to train. It's
So
more
you do-
about the invocation time needs to be really fast, but training can take a little bit longer.
But I'm assuming you have all this data. You don't use it all. So then that's a bit of how you scope down the training time is with.
Yeah, and that's where that's something we're experimenting with at the moment. What is the most relevant data to include in our...
Wow, interesting. So then you said you had about 10 models, but I'm assuming that these 10 models, they're variations of it. Just out of curiosity, how do you keep track of what is where, and how do you maintain these lifelines? Do you have a board of saying, these are where these 10 models are? How do you monitor and check all of this?
So we have Grafana dashboards for live monitoring, and we have Looker dashboards where we model the model performance. And then we mostly break down per company level. So per company, we check how's performance, because we really want to be proactive in finding issues.
And when you look at companies, so I guess you deal with a wide variety from huge companies to very small ones. Does that does that influence the priorities, or it's not necessarily about the company per se, your customer, but it's more of bankings? Do you maybe prioritize more on the banks themselves versus the companies? How do you, in your stand-up, what do you look at first?
Things we often look into is indeed companies that are not working well or not working well. Because what can happen is that something is not implemented correctly for a certain company, and that's something we would like to find out. Another important thing is payment methods, so the Visa, MasterCard, Amex. If something is changing for a certain payment method, then it has a much bigger impact, because it influences a lot of transactions. Issuing country, where the issuing bank is an important factor, because there are huge regional differences. Banking level is a bit too much work to look into, because there are just too many. So we do look into banks occasionally, but more if we're really deep diving on hey, we see this problem, what's happening, but not on a daily basis looking into every bank.
How would you describe what a monorepo is?
So how I would describe it is you have one repository for your entire data department. Yeah, every team has its own folder in a repo, and you can, when you clone the repository, you can look into the code of every team. And when you commit and push to master, that's all to the same repo. And at first, I have to admit, this sounded like a horrible idea. Like, how is this ever going to work? Are you not having merge conflicts the entire time? but this is actually not the case, surprisingly. I have to say, I quite like it. It's super easy to go to look into what others are doing because it's all in the same repo. You can quickly do it. Hey, find all who else is using this feature. And then what I usually do is get blame. Hey, you're using this feature that was created by this person. Let's reach out to this person to ask a little bit more details. Yeah, on the one hand, it's for new joiners, it can be quite overwhelming because you get this repo and you have, I don't know, 30 folders. But once you know your way around it, I think it really increases collaboration. So yeah, there are pros and cons, but overall, I have to say, I started to love the mono repo. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, cool. So then you first got exposed to it when you joined Adyen,
Yes.
right? So this was your first place. Okay. So then let me see if I get this straight. Every morning you have your stand up, right? Then you figure out, and then someone on the team figures out what he or she's going to do. But you'll have a very common tool chain workflow. So you have this large mono repo. So I'm guessing your team has its own little folder. Little is maybe not so little, but you have your folder. But you can see what everybody else does. But then just from my understanding, how does your day today work change because of a mono repo? So my understanding is typically people work on their own little repositories and their teams, maybe 5 to 10, maybe hundreds can work on it. But a mono repo, that you can have like thousands of people touching this. Do you have additional tooling and things that you were surprised that you can say, oh, maybe I don't download everything, maybe I only download partial things? Do you have other tools that you have to train your newcomers before they become effective and maybe not so overwhelmed at the beginning? How does that onboarding look like?
Yeah, so I think our dev teams did a great job in creating a like small command line tool, which we call Data CLI. And this tool helps you to create your environment. So every team, I would say, with its own folder also has its own virtual environment. And this Data CLI, with this Data CLI tool, with 2 commands, you make sure the environment for your team is installed, and also all of the all of the requirements it needs. And so this is pretty easy. And then one thing you need to learn in the beginning is we also have tests.
Okay.
So per project. So depending on, because you can imagine if you change one line of code, you don't want to run all of the tests before needing to merge because that would make your process very slow. So we have tests that actually check, okay, you only changed something in this folder. So that means we only need to run all of the tests of this folder.
Yeah. So just is that also part of your data CLI, or is this something that you just go to PyTest?
Yeah, this is just something PyTest, run test. And it's when you want to merge with our main branch, GitLab automatically runs the correct tests and not all of them.
So you as data scientists don't necessarily need to worry about that. So you do your work, your folder, if the test passed, then you can do a pull request. And then when it goes into main, then it triggers out a larger pipeline that I guess your team is not responsible. And I think you call them the dev teams. Maybe they're the ones who are maintaining this. And that's how the mono repo works. There's a bunch of people making sure that everybody's in sync, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then we have some longer tests that are running overnight. And then when one of those tests fails, it also prints in which folder this is happening. So then the people responsible for that project need to act.
Just out of curiosity, so you called out, said, oh, this is nice because I can look at other people's code and then I can reach out people. So that helps with collaboration. But is it also not a bit of a distraction and maybe in people to copy bad code? So maybe to make it a bit clear. So if I'm a new person, I write some code, it gets through, but it's actually not the right way of doing code. And then department B now says, oh, that's how they did it. I'm going to do the same thing. And then you've got bad code reproducing itself. Does that happen? Or is it a bit the other way? No, we have a process to make sure that bad code just never makes it in. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we have code standards within the entire company. And I think having this single repo makes it actually easier to check, hey, are you following the right code standards? And we also, of course, do reviews before. You cannot just add something to the repo. We always make sure someone reviews. I hope when you're new to the company, someone helps you, hey, these are the code standards, and helps you reviewing, hey, please.
And can you share maybe some of these coding standards or best practices that you guide newcomers through? Maybe do you use like data types, or type hinting,
Yes.
or is this proprietary information?
No, I don't think this is proprietary information. So for standards, we use type hinting. We use the PEP8, mostly follow the PEP8 standards. And we use, what I find very helpful is that we also use black for formatting. You don't have to worry about formatting because before merging codes, it needs to comply with the black standards that we're following.
So you remove that discussion off the table. Sweet.
Yeah.
And maybe just as a sanity check. So sometimes people feel that, if there's a monorepo, that means that my team is less flexible to use new tools. For example, would you be able to, for your specific team, say, I don't want to use black, but I want to change it with, I don't know, like rough. Can you change the requirements for your folder? Or is there a whole process that has to take place that hinders the speed at which you try out new tools? Or is that a bit like, we'll try it out on the side and then we'll wiggle our way in? How does that work?
Yeah, so when it comes to code standard, using different kind of formatting, no, I don't think that's something we would like to all follow the same standards. So there, indeed, you're a bit more constrained maybe, but personally, I like it if everything is in the same style. It makes it easier. But for trying out new libraries or trying out new tools, you're not that constrained.
So if you wanted to change your machine learning framework of choice, be whatever it is that you're using, and you want to try it out, you as a team can do that. Definitely. And each of your folder has its own requirements, TXT, that you can control and change, right? But the standard itself, that you want to keep it across the board, right?
Yes, indeed.
Nice. And then maybe just as a last question on ramping up people. So how big is your team?
We're at 6.
Okay. And when a new person joins, what does that new person's life look like?
What do you mean?
How does it look like? Is it a tough thing to join your team? Is this kind of, we're going to let you on a playground for 6 months, and only after 6 months and proving yourself, you can then work on things? Or how does that work?
No, so I think because the payment landscape is pretty complex, I think so far payments have by far been the most complex product I've worked on. Also makes it very interesting though, but there are so many things you need to know about how the product works. We have a very good, I would say, company onboarding. And in this company onboarding, get to know everything about payments. And you also get introductions from different teams. So it really helps you to get onboarded into, okay, what is Adyen doing? What are payments? How do they work within the detail? And I feel it's very important to not see the optimizations we are doing as abstract things, but also to have an understanding, okay, this is what it's actually doing. And this kind of optimization helps to solve this kind of problem. But for this, you need to build this understanding of payments. So when we have a new joiner, I really encourage them to take time to dive into payments. And I know this is sometimes difficult as a technical person because you want to go into code straight away. But I always try to motivate them, okay, also take time to learn everything on payments because it's important that we understand what we're doing.
Yeah, so I can understand it. So a bit like how I'm a little surprised of all the things that are happening behind the scenes. I guess most people are not fully aware of all the steps that you have to go through. Any true good data scientist, the stronger the domain knowledge, the more insights, the quicker you are fault finding. So it pays itself long term. Yeah. And then maybe just as another thing that you triggered my curiosity a little bit was the fact that this is happening so quickly. This was a surprising insight for me, right? So first of all, I had no idea that there are millions of these things happening. I had no idea the complexity of different banks, message standards, they're changing over time. But when you go to like parties and people ask you what you do for a living, what kind of insight do you tell them to explain how complex this is? Do you have a war story, a funny fact about things? How do you convince other people who are not so technical to believe that this is an awesome thing that you're doing?
Mostly by giving them insights. We make sure that when you want to pay for your music subscription or for your streaming subscription, when you go to a store to buy new shoes, all of these customers are actually integrated with Adyen. So we make sure that all of these payments happen. And then people start to think, and when I buy something, it's actually, I don't really think about these things. They just work. And that's something interesting. In the Netherlands, when I talk about payment optimization, often people say, but payments just get approved, right? how often does it happen that a payment does not get approved? In the Netherlands, we have Ideal, and Ideal is as a payment method works very well. But in other countries, and especially with cross-country payments, there are a lot more things that can fail. So yeah, you just assume that as a customer the payments work, but when they don't work, you get very annoyed, and that's where we step in. We try to make sure that your payment is successful also when you try to buy something in the US.
You work in a very complex environment, right? So you have a bunch of people working and the complexity seems to keep growing. If you could ask the world to change something, what would that ask be to make your life easier? Would it be to say, dear Visa, dear American Express, please stop changing your protocols? Or is it the fact that they keep changing it? Does that add more value to what your company does so it keeps you in business? You must struggle a little bit with this idea, right? Must be a bit of a conflicting wish here.
Yes, indeed. So on the one hand, I want everything to be standardized, because if everyone follows the same rules and same structure, then there's no need for this ambiguity. That would also mean we don't need a model anymore. So on the one hand, payments are, on the one hand, I really would like payments to be as efficient as possible, but it would also mean that there's no need for a model anymore if everything is standardized.
But the good news is I'm assuming banks don't synchronize across the globe that quickly, but I'm assuming that maybe you as a company, as you grow in your reach, you might have more and more feedback. So hopefully, I'm assuming as you grow, you also can start influencing how things are done, and maybe that can make life a little bit easier for everybody. The other thing that I wanted to ask you, Nikki, is I saw you as a volunteer of PyData. First of all, what's this PyData thing? Tell me a bit about PyData and why are you a volunteer in PyData?
Yeah, so PyData is a community, and data supports open source tools. We are a bunch of cool people that mostly work in Python and Julia, and we come together to inspire each other on what are the latest trends, what are the new cool open source libraries, how can we work more efficient, really to learn from each other. And I feel it's a really supportive community. We really, when you join we organize meetup and conferences, and I really feel that people are there to support each other, to listen to each other. Yeah, I really feel it's a welcoming community. So if you're programming in Python or Julia and you would like to meet other people working in Python, or even get to know the people that created the open source libraries that you're using every day, then I would really encourage you to come to a meetup or conference once.
Nice. How did you stumble across these PyDatas? Did you hear about it at university, or was it just in Amsterdam? You saw there was a meetup and a friend told you about it? How did you stumble into this?
I think I actually started getting to know about PyData via PyData Eindhoven, which you are organizing here. So I think a previous colleague of mine was a speaker there. And then it got me interested, and he told me like, oh yeah, if you have this cool project, why don't you submit a talk? And I was like, okay, let's just try it out. And I actually submitted in, I think, 2019. And it was, even though it was online, it was a very good experience. And lots of chats afterwards, interesting ideas that came out. And then I think that's when I really got to like the PyData community, get to know them. And I thought, I would like to be more involved.
Yeah. So I think it's very cool. And I see some companies actually use it as a bit of a rite of passage. So they encourage their team members to get that out there and tell a story, right?
Yeah.
So do you also have that bit of that philosophy at Adyen, that you can have internal meetings and you can tell your internal buddies, but actually what you should be able to do is go and tell your story to a wider audience? Is that kind of what you encourage as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Because it's a nice feeling to be able to say, hey, I know my stuff in front of a bunch of strangers, right? And just knowing inside your company, that's also nice, but you get asked different questions.
Yes, and different perspectives and things you might not have even have considered before.
Yeah. And but the term PyData, so this is actually also used for, you mentioned some of these packages. So is the money going from these PyData meetups, conferences to these authors? How does that work exactly?
Yeah, behind PyData, there's an organization, non-focus. And so all the profits from the conferences and sponsors goes to non-focus, and non-focus pays these open source libraries that we're using every day, like Pandas, MATLAB.
Matplotlib. Yeah. Nice. So it's a way to keep these things going, right? So I'm assuming that it's not enough to pay for people's salaries, but it takes the money to keep things going, like payment infrastructures and things like that.
Exactly.
Very cool. How should people reach out to you if they have additional questions?
Yeah, of course. You feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I'm also joining most PyData meetups or the conference if you want to meet in person.
This is a great place to stop this episode. I hope it triggered your curiosity in some shape or form of how MATLAB, Python, or Julia are actually used in the real world. If you did find it interesting, just subscribe in your favorite podcast player. And while you're at it, write a review, as this will help the podcast growing strong. In addition to that, don't be shy, share it with a couple of friends, as who knows, one of them might be a future guest on Inspiring Computing. Thank you.